Okay, you are listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the show, we'll be joined by Philadelphia City Commissioner Omar Sabir. Our own Lance Tabor will have an interview with the Philly Transit Riders Union. Attorney Ann Marcatello will walk us through the landmark school funding case, and Chris Murray will provide a report from Super Bowl 57. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. And you know Chris Murray. You may have heard of
Yeah,
him.
yeah. I see him around
All
the
right. So
house.
we'll be looking forward to that. And Lance, how are you tonight?
I'm all right. I'm remembering your words. I'm enjoying the weather, but I'm scared for the future.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's how I feel every day. It's warm in
It's 60
February.
degrees today. I live in South Philly. The trees in the park next to me are blooming. It's beautiful, but can't be a good thing. February 15th.
Yeah,
Trees blooming.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
Lance, tell us a little bit about what we're going to see tonight.
I think most of us know that City Council held hearings on SEPTA's quote unquote bus revolution. And SEPTA made a number of promises about how they're going to do more outreach and they're going to postpone everything for at least a year. And I've been kind of waiting for SEPTA to announce those new meetings or those new groupings or those new people who are getting together to talk about it. And nothing has happened. So I've reached out to the only organization that only represents riders, and that's the Philadelphia Transit Riders Union. And they were kind enough to sit down and talk a little bit about the bus revolution, what it means to people who are looking at the bus cuts and what they believe SEPTA should do next. So if we could just run that, I think people will see just what the situation is that we're in and how the stakeholders are really being left behind. I'm the consumer reporter for Hall Monitor. So thank you for joining us tonight. We're here with Anthony Lozzotti and Marcus McKnight of the Transit Riders Union, and they're going to be talking about an issue we've been covering, which is the bus revolution. So let me start out by introducing Anthony. Anthony, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization?
So my name is Anthony Lanzalotti, native of Philadelphia. I do reside in New Jersey now, currently, and I'm a member of the Philly Transit Riders Union. A little more, I'm a totally blind individual, and so I utilize transportation. Public transportation is the key to my success.
Thank you. Marcus?
All righty, good afternoon. My name is Marcus McKnight. I am a bus operator in the Philadelphia area, and I am on the coordinating committee of the Philly Transit Riders Union.
So, Marcus, are you a SEPTA bus driver?
I am not.
Okay. So, what do you think about what SEPTA is trying to do with what they call their bus revolution?
I think that's SEPTA's goal. Their goal is to increase frequency to allow more freedom to use the network seamlessly, which is a really great goal.
And how does the bus revolution accomplish that, or does it fail to accomplish that?
Well, in certain aspects, the bus revolution accomplishes this by adding frequency to a lot of lines that really need it and providing more weekend and evening frequencies for a lot of transit lines. However, even though some lines and some neighborhoods are benefiting from added frequency, other neighborhoods are losing out on service. Either their service is getting running less often, their service having fewer operating hours, or some transit lines are being cut completely. So in this case, it's kind of like you're robbing Peter to pay Paul here.
Anthony, what would you say is the likelihood of the bus revolution meeting SEPTA's goal?
I don't know if Marcus would agree or not. I'd say that it's highly unlikely, only because of the fact, as we're seeing, seems to be a lot of pushback, and people are starting to finally realize what this means for them personally and how it will affect them personally. But I think Marcus said it perfectly. You're basically, since they use the term cost neutral, we're not throwing any SEPTA's not in a position to put any additional resources at the situation. So yeah, that's the reality of it. Is someone is going to gain some service, someone's going to lose some service.
When I talk to riders, one of the things they've pointed out to me is many of them have organized their lives around the existing SEPTA routes. And many of the people who are complaining the most were people who have students going to the magnet schools, and they were relying upon SEPTA to get their students to those magnet schools. My question is this: if they don't do enough outreach, if they fail to include the schools, how is it possible for them to actually make it better?
That's a very good question. And as we clearly see, there's not there. All right, there is some outreach. SEPTA has been, done pop-ups at transportation centers across the system. They've had online conversations and community conversations. Okay, but the issue is that there are too many folks who just aren't aware of what's going on. As we clearly saw in the city council testimony, a lot of people were providing feedback about how this is going to affect them. But that's just some people. I'm willing to bet you, a nice steak dinner. I'm willing to bet you a steak dinner, a cup of coffee, whatever it is. If we go out on a bus line, a random bus line, in a random neighborhood, start talking to people, it'll be probably the first time hearing about a bus revolution, how their lines might change. It's not, if they don't do more outreach, and I mean riding every transit line in the system outreach, we're going to have a big problem when it starts. One thing I personally said, and I've talked with other members of the Philly True about this, we said, hey, ideally there should be some kind of metric, some kind of threshold that they should reach per route. So 75 to 80% of riders on each transit line should be spoken to or connected with or whatever it is. You should get some kind of feedback from them about these proposed changes. Otherwise, we've got a big problem in hands.
Right. Anthony, how would you think the best way to reach riders would be?
Well, I think all the above. Personally, a poster is not going to do me any good because I'm unable to see it. So, for me, it would be online, and even then, that's questionable. And I say that because the documents that they've put up to date, they're not very accessible. They're just, and that gets very technical in nature. But as I said to you before the show, there's a whole constituency of people that they're not even reaching, who they utilize. There is no choice. They don't have the option to get in a car or take. It's public transportation, or it's an Uber or a Lyft, or it's nothing. That's it.
So let me start with
And I want to.
let me focus a little bit on SEPTA's decision that transfers are things people don't mind. And the research that I have seen suggests when you add a transfer, ridership goes down. So let me start with Anthony and then come back to Marcus. Anthony, do you have any thoughts on whether transfers are something that is good for a bus system or bad for a bus system or neutral?
I think it depends. I think if the transfers if they're easy, if they're seamless, for example, if I can, and all right, I'll admit I haven't been in Center City in a little while, but when I was there last, many of the entrances to the concourse were at the time locked. Now, as someone personally in my position, you're taught something called orientation and mobility. So if you go into a certain entrance and you go back, well, if that entrance is locked, you have to use another entrance, which, okay, for me, I'm a skilled traveler, so I can recover. Someone who's not maybe as skilled of a traveler and dealing with a visual impairment, that could really throw them off. That could really confuse some. And if you're just not familiar, that could really be confusing. So I think it depends on the situation, and that's just one example.
It's pretty clear that the original plan that they brought forward is not acceptable to city council or to riders. So if you were going to offer SEPTA some free advice, what would you advise them to do now?
Anthony, you want to start off with it?
Sure. If it were me, you got to open the system up. The answer is not to close certain stations if you have an issue. If there seems to be if a particular station, whether it's the Broad Street line, the Broad Street sub with the L, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, if it seems to be overrun with homeless population, then you need to work closely with the city and see how you can best deal with that issue. You got to open up Center City. You got to open up the system. It has to be free. It's got to be easy. It's got to be seamless, especially if we want to encourage people to come back and we want to encourage somewhat of whatever the new norm is going to be, and maybe get back to pre-pandemic levels. That's what's going to increase ridership. Then we can talk about, are we going to redesign this, that, and the other? That would be my suggestion.
Marcus?
At this point,
Yeah.
at this point, you're going to have to go back to. At this point, you have to go back to the bare basics here. All right, you got to sit down and you got to say, what are we doing? What is our goal? Our short-term goals and our long-term goals. And then you need to be open and honest with people about these goals. In the beginning, we said that the bus revolution was a cost-neutral project to reallocate resources to accomplish certain things. Okay, now here we are, and 2023, and it's like, all right, now it's like, okay, we got to make some changes because the bus network is not working out the way we want it to, and if we don't make changes, it's going to lead to future service cuts. Why didn't we say that from the beginning?
Thank you both. I want to ask if you would like to tell us how people can get in touch with the Transit Riders Union.
Yeah, I'll just say they can go to phillytrue.org, and they can, and what's the number, Marcus?
Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, phone number, all that's on the webpage.
And one more time, the webpage is Philly.
www.phillytru.org.
So that's
All right.
that's the interview. Again, that's the only organization that is made up of transit riders, and clearly what they're saying is not enough outreach. Good ideas to try and fix the system, bad implementation of how they're doing it, and they're basically saying they have to start all over. What's upsetting when I follow this is the promises SEPTA made to City Council to start doing outreach, to have stakeholders meetings. That doesn't seem to be happening yet. And I'm wondering what the next step for SEPTA is going to be.
All right. Well, Lance, thank you so much for doing that. We're going to be keeping an eye on that. It's one of the things we get asked about the most from our readers and listeners and viewers. Next, 2 weeks ago, there was a landmark court case that could have a big impact on school funding here in Pennsylvania and in Philadelphia. We spoke with Ann Marcatelli, who was one of the attorneys who worked on that case, and here's what she had to tell us about it. Okay, we are here with Ann Marcatello. Ann, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure to be here.
So let me start off with the first big question. How did you get involved with this case?
Sure. So this case was first filed back in 2014. It's hard to believe at this point, it's almost 10 years ago. And the case was filed specifically after a wave of massive draconian cuts to state funding in Pennsylvania. So in 2011 and 2012, the state cut about $1 billion of school funding, and for Philadelphia specifically, it was about $300 million. And these cuts had drastic, draconian implications on school districts and their ability to educate their students. Thousands of teachers were lost or laid off. Class sizes increased dramatically, and school districts had to cut extracurriculars. They really had to drastically cut back on the education they were able to give to their students. So organizations approached the Public Interest Law Center and the Education Law Center, who are our co-counsel in this case, about filing this suit. It was really clear. Everyone knows there is a long history of underfunding in Pennsylvania, but specifically at this time, it was clear something had to change. And so the Public Interest Law Center and the Education Law Center have a history of being involved in these cases. in school funding suits and educational equity suits, and had previously represented petitioners. So they were approached about filing the suit. And then they approached O'Melveny and Myers, which is where I work, to partner with them as a litigation pro bono counsel. O'Melveny has a long history of being involved in civil rights litigation, but specifically in educational equity suits. Our former partner, Bill Coleman, was co-counsel on Brown v. Board of Education, and he has represented petitioners in Pennsylvania in other school equity, school funding suits. And so O'Melveny was just a natural fit, and we were happy to take on this case and champion this really important cause. And that is how we got to where we are.
So can you give us a little bit of a synopsis of the case?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, the case was first filed in 2014, and we represent several school districts, low wealth school districts in the Commonwealth, as well as individual petitioners who are parents of students who were educated in districts in the Commonwealth, and two organizations that represent both individuals and different school districts in the Commonwealth. And so we filed the suit alleging that the state is not meeting its constitutional requirement to educate all students within the Commonwealth and provide them with the education that they are guaranteed by the Constitution, which is a thorough and efficient education. And that is clear across however you cut the pie across all sorts of different measures, that low wealth school districts are not getting the same education as high wealth school districts, and they are not able to meet the needs of their students. And I mean, the Commonwealth was just failing hundreds of thousands of students across the board who were not able to succeed academically because they weren't getting the resources and the things that they needed to be able to access their education. So we filed the suit. We alleged, again, that the Constitution was being violated, both in terms of the standard of education that the Constitution guarantees, but also that low wealth school districts were specifically being discriminated against as compared to high wealth school districts. And then that violates the Equal Protection Clause of the Pennsylvania Constitution. And so the case actually was originally dismissed, and we appealed. It went up to the Supreme Court. And in 2017, we argued in front of the Supreme Court that this case needed to be heard. So in the past, school funding cases in Pennsylvania had been dismissed as non-justiciable, which means that they are not within the purview of the judicial branch. They are legislative policy decisions that are being made, and that the judicial branch couldn't rule and couldn't step in. And in a landmark case in 2017, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said, no, this is so important, this can be heard. And they remanded the case back to the Commonwealth Court, which is where we had our trial, for the Commonwealth Court to develop a record and to give meaning to the language of the Constitution. What does it mean to have a thorough and efficient education? And to develop the record about whether that standard was being met, whether the funding in the Commonwealth whether the Commonwealth was adequately funding school districts so that they could meet that standard. And so after the case was remanded, we worked on it for several years. We spent a lot of time in our petitioner school districts getting to know all of the educators there, hearing their stories, getting to know what they face on a day-to-day basis, and just the heartbreaking, devastating circumstances that they have to deal with because of the lack of funding from the state. And we also worked with our experts to develop the data. Pennsylvania publishes a lot of data about the schools and how schools are funded and how students are doing. And so we harnessed all of that data and analyzed it to show that it is so clear based on the numbers that low wealth school districts and historically underperforming children, economically disadvantaged children, African American, Latino, all of them are not getting the education that they need because they are not getting the funding in their districts to provide the resources that they need to learn. And And so it culminated in a about 4-month trial. We started in November of 2021 and trial ended in March of 2022. And we presented all of this to the court. We proved our case. And, we waited, and here we are today, about a year later, with an 800-page opinion affirming everything that we put forward in the suit.
So what could this mean for the future of Philadelphia schools?
Yeah, I mean, it changes everything. In my view, there is a before and there is an after, and we are now in the after. Everyone knows that schools in the Commonwealth and that the School District of Philadelphia is underfunded. It's logical. You can look, you can see it. You talk to anyone, you talk to students, everybody knows it. But now the court has recognized that. And the court has said every student in the Commonwealth now has a constitutional right to an education. They have a constitutional right to an education that provides them with a meaningful opportunity to succeed socially, academically, and civically. And that means that every student in the Commonwealth needs to have access to a comprehensive, contemporary, and effective system of public education. And not only that, but education is a fundamental right. So these students now have this right that they didn't have before. And it is a right that means that the state and that the legislature has to fund their schools to give them that constitutionally guaranteed education. So it is just a life-changing victory. It will change the lives of the 1.7 million students who are educated in the Commonwealth today and all future students to come. And we are just so thrilled and so excited to see what happens next.
All right, I'd like to bring Denise Clay Murray here on Philadelphia Home Monitor.
Hi, and thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
I guess I covered schools, particularly the Philadelphia School District and some school districts in Western Pennsylvania, throughout the time that we've been talking about schools being underfunded. I think what I'd like for you to do first is to define what a low wealth school district is, because a lot of people, when they hear about school funding and school funding issues, they think that this is just Philadelphia, and it's actually not.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It is not. We represented 6 school districts from across the Commonwealth, all different sizes, from one of the smallest school districts to Lancaster, which is one of the largest. And they are exemplars of what the issues are in low-wealth school districts. So that is school districts that they do not have enough wealth based on certain metrics to raise enough money based on local taxes to provide adequate funding to their students. So there are certain cutoffs that are used to look at the amount of funding per pupil and per student weighted need. So students who need more, how much money they are getting per student for their education. And then we contrast that with school districts that are adequately funded, that are able to raise enough money through their local property taxes to provide a higher number of dollars per student.
Was part of the lawsuit, I guess, an ask on the part of the Commonwealth to look for a different way to fund education? Because obviously, if you do it by property taxes, Lower Merion is their property taxes are higher than Philadelphia. So was that addressed at all in the suit?
It was. So one of the only justifications that the respondents in the case, who were the legislature and the executive branch, put forward was local control. And that, local school districts should be able to decide how they want to raise their money and how much they want to tax. And our biggest point was that local control is illusory in that way, because certain districts just don't have the money, no matter what they tax their constituents, to raise enough to provide an adequate education for their students. And so we showed through our experts that even if some of the poorest districts in the Commonwealth taxed at the highest level, they still wouldn't generate even close to the same amount of money as higher wealth students. The money just isn't there, and you can't pull it out of thin air. And the court agreed. In the court's opinion, the court said that local control is not a meaningful justification, even at the lowest level of a state justification for these inadequacies, because it's illusory. It is not a real defense or explanation for why these school districts are funded so differently. And the court said it is up to the Commonwealth to figure out how to fix that. She established what the constitutional standard is and said that is being violated. She recognized that the Commonwealth is not adequately funded, that students are not getting the resources that they need. They are not getting the education that they need to succeed. And it is up to the legislature to figure out how to fix that.
So is this an enforceable lawsuit? Because depending on who you talk to, there's an enforcement mechanism or there's not an enforcement mechanism. So is there an enforcement mechanism? And if so, how does it get deployed to make a legislature that said it was okay back in the Casey administration to not fund special ed on the part of the Commonwealth? How do you get those folks to understand that the Constitution says you've got to put more money into schools?
Yeah, that's a great question, Denise. It is enforceable. That is the role of the judicial branch. And we have this opinion now. We have this 800-page opinion where the court found that the Commonwealth is not adequately funding its schools. And she recognized everything that we put forward, that every child can learn, that some students need more resources than others, and that those resources are not being provided because of the lack of funding. And she recognized education has this place in the Constitution because it is so important. It is up there as one of the most important things that was recognized by the delegates in Pennsylvania when you look back at the constitutional history. And she recognized that it's a fundamental right. And that is just huge, because now there is a constitutionally recognized standard and right that has to be enforced. And she said to the legislature that that is their role. It is not our role in the judicial branch or as litigators to say what the solution is or how much funding is needed, but the system is broken and it needs to be fixed. And there is a court order that says it needs to be fixed. And so we will hold them accountable, and we will come back as often and as many times as we have to make sure that that constitutional standard and constitutional promise is met.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for giving us some of your time today. I really appreciate it, and Larry does too. And it's an issue that's been going on for a very, very long time. As I said, I used to cover schools, and since the 1980s, Pennsylvania went from funding like 60% of its mandates to funding only, at the last statistics I saw, somewhere in the neighborhood of 13 or 14%. And when special ed is such a huge part of the budget, that takes school districts that don't have a lot of money and puts them behind a fairly major 8-ball. So thank you so much for talking to us about this, and we'll be keeping an eye on it as well. So we'd love to have you back as it progresses. And
all right, we would like to thank Ms. Marcatello for being with us on the program. She gave us a very good, concise explanation of what happened with that case and what the next steps are, and we really appreciate that. And it's something that's so important. We've been talking about school funding for how long? Oh, I think you're on mute there, Denise.
I feel like it's a discussion we've never completely stopped having. And again, it's like I mentioned, special education. If the Commonwealth just picked up the tab for the stuff that it mandates, school districts to do, the stuff that it says you must do this. If they just picked up that money, if they just picked up the tab for that, school districts would be much better off, because if you look at school districts prior to the Casey administration, when Pennsylvania decided to stop funding everything it used to fund, and you look at the present, a lot of the things that we're talking about now in terms of school funding, we weren't talking about then. We weren't talking about having to raise taxes on people who can barely afford the taxes they're paying now. We didn't have to talk about cutting things like guidance counselors and librarians out of school. How do you cut a librarian out of a school and expect kids to learn? These weren't conversations we were having when the Commonwealth was funding what it demanded of, school districts to have. And it has to go back to that.
And at one point, the state legislature did pass a fair funding formula, but it only applied to new revenue. So it was about 12% of the overall pie that went through this different formula, which is, nothing. It didn't make any kind of difference. And again, one of those things that it's hard to say that wasn't by design, that's how it feels.
Well, the conspiracy theorist in a lot of us looks at who is most adversely affected by those cuts and by that lack of funding. And you think, well, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but I also can't ignore the fact that most of the people impacted by these cuts are people who are poor, people who are Black and brown, people in mostly rural places. You're not hearing about these cuts. Lower Marion's not impacted. I'll just say that.
Right.
And that's not absolutely right. And, like I said, the conspiracy theorist in all of us can kind of look at this and say, I think this is targeted.
Well, there's more to come on this story, and we were very happy to be able to speak with an attorney who worked on it. She gave us a lot of great information. But there's a lot of other things going on in the city right now, Denise, and one of them is we have a new candidate in the mayoral race.
Yes.
And who is that?
David O, who is one of the 3 minority seat holders in city council. He's a Republican, has thrown his hat in to be the city's next mayor. He had a fairly elaborate announcement at the National Constitution Center, where if you're going to have, an announcement related to democracy, having it there is not such a bad idea. However, I hope they gave him the space for free, because one of the problems, there are a myriad of problems that Councilman O is probably going to have here. But one of the biggest is that he's going to be running for mayor with, on behalf of a party that has never endorsed him when he was running for city council, and B, even if they did endorse him, could not back that endorsement up with any money. For some reason, the Republican Party in Philadelphia, even when it went over its makeover and started to be a little more assertive, that assertiveness didn't necessarily come with money. It didn't necessarily come with fundraising. And for some reason, the National Party, who you would think would want to see a city like Philadelphia, go more Republican and thus be a feather in their cap, they don't give any money to the city Republicans. So while I wish former Councilman O luck in his attempt to be mayor, I don't know about this one.
So there's a lot of things that go into this, right? So the Republican Party in Philadelphia right now in terms of voter registration, is actually in like third place behind the Democrats, then independents, then Republicans. And that is not an enviable place to be. Now it's close for second and third, but that was the last voter registration statistics show that. So you have a lot of ground to try to cover there. I would expect Councilmember O's strategy is to court independents. I don't see any other way to get close, but he also would have to peel off a good number of Democrats, which I think he believes he can do. Because when you get to the November election, so using the last city council race as maybe a little bit of a guide, when you're in the polling place, you vote for 5 members of council. But you can vote for, if you're a Democrat, you could vote for a Republican if you wanted to. And some Democrats have done that in the past. They voted for David O to be the Republican member of council. So in that regard, I think when you put those factors together, plus I don't think there is an event in the city that David O misses. Whether that is a ethnic celebration of some kind, art galleries, sporting events, whatever it is, I always feel like Councilmember O had always been there. So when you start putting all those things together, and the fact that it doesn't look like there's going to be, at least right now anyway, another candidate on the Republican ticket for mayor, on the Republican in the primary, it seems like, those are the things that he's kind of banking on. Now, when you put all those things into perspective, and maybe David O could have a little bit of success fundraising maybe outside the city. Maybe the National Republican Party isn't going to help him, but maybe he can reach out a little bit to different places in the country to say, I'm a moderate Republican who has a legitimate shot at running for mayor here in Philadelphia and winning the seat. Maybe there is a way to do that. But I think even when you factor all those things together, it's still a very narrow path. What would it have to look like for David O to get close, in your opinion, please?
Well, first of all, if you had asked me this question like 10 or 12 years ago, I would be like, oh, okay, this is exactly what he can do to peel off some Democrats, to bring in some national Republican money, to get nearly 100% turnout among Republicans here in the city, and to, do those kinds of things. If you had asked me that 12 years ago, I would have a much more positive answer for you. But this isn't 12 years ago, unfortunately. This is the age of Trump. And why that's important is that the National Democratic Party doesn't fund moderates anymore. That's why they, lost the Senate and didn't win the House by as much as they thought they would, because they don't finance moderates anymore. They finance the Doug Mastrianos of the world, the people who think that, drag shows are going to lead to massive incidents of sex trafficking and other crazy stuff. That is who the Republican Party is giving money to. And unfortunately, and this is something that city Republicans have never, ever realized, no matter how many times I have told them, because they have been crazy enough to ask me. I've told them time and time again, until you all get your national crazies in check, it's not going to matter locally, because when people hear the word Republican in Philadelphia, they don't think David O, they don't think the late Arlen Specter, they don't think any of those guys. They think Trump, they think Martina White, they think people who have shown a propensity to have it in for them.
Well, and just within 2020, what Trump had said about Philadelphia.
Right. Oh,
People
bad
haven't
things
forgotten that.
happen here. And the bad thing that happened to him was he got unelected. But, the thing is, there are things that David O has done that are very admirable things. There are stances he's taken that are very admirable stances. I just think that he might have waited too late in his political career to actually take this on, because even with the gun violence issues, even with some of the stuff that he has been, very vocal about, you've got 12 Democrats that are running right now. And one of the things that would have to happen for him to peel off any Democrats is for a Democrat that people don't like to end up getting the nomination. And even the ones they don't really like from what I'm hearing, the main thing that made him decide to run was he was hoping to pick off Helen Gim.
Yeah.
And what he fails to realize is that while you may be able to try and paint Helen Gim as truly unlikable, the people who really like her will come out for her, and they will make sure that other people come out for her.
Yeah.
So, if that's the reason you did it, I question your wisdom.
And yeah, so it's a strange situation. It's you never say never in politics, but it's pretty close to saying never, maybe, right? That any Republican could win this seat right now in this climate this year, right? And I want to be very clear. We're not equating David O at all with the fringe of the Republican Party that seems to have taken over.
No, he doesn't even go to the RNC. He's tried. No. He's made such an effort to stay away from that he doesn't even go to the Republican National Convention. But in this case, that might hurt him a little, because if they don't know you, they're really not going to give you any money.
Yeah. I would look at him the same way somebody would look at Arlen Specter 20 years ago, right? Like that moderate Republican who sometimes will vote with Democrats, sometimes won't. But, maybe pragmatist is the right word. I'm not, right. There's a lot of different ways you could describe him, that are, I think are complementary. So, but, I think it's an interesting race. It gives the Republican Party a real candidate for mayor.
It gives them a standard bearer that, depending on who the Democrats put up, it could really make things interesting. But it's going to depend on money. It's going to depend on whether or not he can get even all of the Republicans behind him, what he can do with independents, and who the Democrats put up is. Because there are certain Democrats that if they win, it'll be over by 8:05.
Yeah.
Like the polls will close at 8 by 8:05, it'll be over.
Yeah.
But there are some Democrats that if they make it, he might have a shot at sticking around until midnight.
Now, and the other thing too is it's not clear who the Democratic nominee is going to be now. It's only February. And when you have a field this large, if all of them stay in, which I don't think is what's going to happen, but let's assume they do, right? They all stay in the race. They're all on the ballot. Ballot position will matter. And almost anything could happen, because the winner could get 25 or 30,000 votes and win that election. So it's
sad.
Right. It could kind of go any which way. So maybe, there is a universe where Councilmember O gets a more favorable matchup and has the best opportunity he could have. Like it could happen. But we're going to see. So Denise, I think we have another guest on the show. Maybe you'd like to introduce them.
Okay. Well, unless you were underneath a rock or something over the last 2 weeks, on Sunday, the Eagles played the Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl. Unfortunately, due to the fact that, sometimes we have referees in the NFL that will call a holding penalty with 1:30 left on a ball that is uncatchable. The Eagles
that they hadn't been calling all night, by the way.
Right. The Eagles lost. But One of the people that was at the Super Bowl and one of the folks that we here at Hall Monitor sponsored as he was covering the Super Bowl was my husband, Chris Murray. And we're going to bring him on now so that he can talk to us a little bit about his experience at the Super Bowl and also a little bit about the business of football, because Lance Haver wrote a column about the business of football that I thought was really interesting. That talked about the more socialist aspects of the NFL. And we kind of wanted to get into that with Chris. So, hi, Chris. How are you?
How are you guys doing today? Can y'all hear me pretty well?
Yeah,
Yep.
we hear you.
Okay. Well, it's interesting. The NFL has always been one of the biggest socialist collectives since, since I would say about the late 1960s. And they all pool their resources. That's why they've been so successful, because a lot of the owners are on the same page and all this other stuff So it's interesting that you say that. I mean, it's something that it's a funny thing how these people speak against socialism, and they're the biggest socialists on God's green earth. And
Mhm.
so, and so from that standpoint, I think Lance is right about that. And they basically, they share the wealth and everything, and they make it so that they all get paid from the TV contracts. They all get paid. I mean, all the owners get paid from the TV contracts. They all get paid, whether their team is in the Super Bowl or not. And so, you know, that's that. If that's not collectivism and all that, then you can't tell me what is. And from that perspective, I wish somehow the government could, like, I don't know, share that with the average working person, like paid family leave and all that other fun stuff. But it's a socialism of millionaires and whatnot. So that's what this whole thing is about.
So, talk a little bit about the atmosphere out in Arizona. What did you see? Who did you see? What did you hear?
Well, the thing about Eagles fans dominated the whole scene there up up until Sunday, until they lost the game. And I mean, I was down at the convention center, and Phoenix. I think it was one that we went to at NABJ back about 25 years ago, something like that. And then it was just Eagles fans. Eagles, Eagles. I mean, I heard that thing. It was like that. I was saying to myself, "Am I abroad in Patterson? Am I somewhere in South Philly here? I'm way 3,000 miles away in Arizona." And I'm like, "Wow." I'm sitting here like, wow, the Eagles fans really dominated. Kansas City fans, oddly enough, are really nice. I talked to a lot of Kansas City fans, and it was nice. I talked to some of the people, like pregame. People were really excited. I mean, this was a really big. A lot of Eagles fans really thought they were going to win that game. I thought they would win as well. I thought it was going to, but I knew it was going to be close. And the atmosphere was, like, again, the day leading up to it, people were out excited. I saw Randall Cunningham. They didn't let us interview him, but I took some pictures of Randall Cunningham, and I saw some of the other lot of local celebrities. Of course, I don't know if anybody saw my Facebook page. I was on, like, during the pregame. I was interviewing a lot of Philadelphia fans, and I was interviewing all kinds of people. So I had to go back to the locker room. I mean, go back to the press box. So all of a sudden, the security guards came down. We had instead of going upstairs, we went downstairs, and the security guard said, "Okay, I need everybody to get off the elevator because we're bringing on assistant coaches." And I'm saying to myself, well, it was about maybe an hour before the game, maybe a half hour before the game. And I'm saying to myself, wait a minute, I looked out, I don't see any coaches. So I saw some of these guys with hoodies. I saw some rather glamorous women. And when I looked, and then I turned around and looked, I saw Jay Z, the rapper Jay Z, on the elevator. So I'm saying, so they kicked us off, so they get all the celebrities upstairs. So I saw Jay Z, and I think I saw, and no, I saw Anthony Anderson. I saw him coming on, and I was just like, no, he wasn't on. He was coming off because we were delayed in getting on the elevator for the celebrities. So it was kind of surreal because I was like, wow, there's Jay-Z, and I'm getting kicked off this elevator because of that. And I'm saying to myself, well, the celebrities have the privilege. So, there were all kinds of people there. I saw Paul McCartney. I saw, the usual Kevin Hart and all that. So, like I said, the atmosphere, between before the game, a lot, like I said, Philadelphia took over, and took over Phoenix, Arizona, and various parts. And you saw Eagles fans just about everywhere. They outnumbered the Kansas City fans. I mean, now I didn't see any incidents or anything like that, and I didn't see any. I mean, pregame, before the game, everybody was well behaved, obnoxious but well behaved. Because I remember in Minneapolis, I saw a guy. I was doing my man on the street stuff at the Minneapolis Super Bowl when the Eagles won. I saw an Eagles fan. He was all drunked out and everything, and he gotten arrested before the game started. The game hadn't even started. But from what I saw, Eagles fans were well behaved, and so it was fun. I mean, and we also okay. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm talking.
No, I had a question for you.
Yeah.
And that question is, talk a little bit about the game itself. I mean, not so much the game because we all saw the game, but there were a lot of, there's a lot that goes into that. There's a lot of like pregame stuff and postgame stuff and stuff that involves like production and different things. Where were you sitting?
We were in the press box. I was sitting on the first row with all the Philly reporters. I mean, at least in this situation, they weren't like usually at Eagles games. I'm sitting on the same row as them, but far away from the mainstream Philadelphia Inquirer, Daily News, and all those other people. In this situation, they allowed me to be a part of the crowd, and we were kind of kitty cornered, on it was, we weren't behind the end zone, but we were like around the 10, 15, 20-yard line. And we had a great view. We were like, it wasn't like the link. We were like, almost at really like near fan view. We had great seats. I mean, we did have great seats. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, we were in the press box. The food was good. I had a couple. I had some tacos, and then they brought more food. They had hamburgers, hot dogs. It became a barbecue. I was busy. I was busy a lot during that time because I was trying to chronicle just about every play, and I was just about to, just trying to look at every situation and what. And plus, I was trying to refurbish my lead because I knew that even though the Eagles had gone up 24-14, I knew Patrick Mahomes was going to come back. That game was not going to end without the Chiefs attempting to come back. So I knew that lead was kind of fragile. So, I spent a lot of time talking to reporters. We were talking about, just how this whole thing was going and whatnot. And we noticed how badly the Eagles, the defense was getting pushed around the field. And we were like, geez, where's the adjustments coming in? Is this guy going to throw any adjustments and all that? And it's just one of those things, man. It was a heck of a football game. I'll say that.
Did you have a question, Larry?
I have more of a statement. Two of my favorite things are socialism and football, so this is great for me to be talking about this. But the only thing I have to say is the best move the Eagles made on their trip to Arizona was leaving Jonathan Gannon behind and coming home with that. Because I'm so. How do you go that long without a blitz? You know what I'm saying? The four-man rush wasn't working. You got to do something else, and you can't let Kansas City have 3 straight touchdowns, 4 straight scoring drives in the second half. That's the fumble didn't cost them the game. The pass interference call at the end didn't cost them the game. It was that, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right about there were no adjustments. And
Right.
that was the thing that bothered me. They didn't make any adjustments, and
No.
I think that the Chiefs showed the Eagles some things that they didn't see in the film, because some of the touchdowns, either they didn't see that in film, but you have to adjust when you see certain things. And I think that Gannon called a poor game. If you want to be honest about it, Gannon called a poor game. I didn't see any adjustments. It looked like the front four had gotten old in front of before our eyes. I mean, Brandon Graham, and I love Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox, but those guys got old. And I think Reddick couldn't hit. I mean, Reddick was well blocked. I mean, Reddick kept trying, but he was always short, or they moved away from him, moved the pocket around away from him. And so they had no adjustments. I didn't see, the linebackers disappeared. I didn't see Kazir White. I didn't see, I just didn't see the linebackers really, show up in this game. I just didn't. And it was mind-boggling. Meanwhile, Jalen Hurts probably played the second greatest game for a losing quarterback. I mean, and if you saw the interview with Patrick Mahomes talking about Jalen Hurts, I asked him that question. I was the one who asked Patrick Mahomes, what did you think of Hurts? Because had they won, he was going to be the MVP of the game. I mean, to me, he was the best player on the field in that game. But the thing about it, the defense couldn't stop Mahomes, T.J. Edwards, and all those guys that that was supposed to be the Eagles' defense. They just did not show up at all in that second half, and that happened. And because I think the Eagles were pretty much in control of the game, but they just could not. The offense did everything they were supposed to do, I think, in my opinion. Yes, Hurts made the fumble, but Hurts showed his resilience. I mean, I just wrote a column for the Sunday Sun about that. So I think at the end of the day, he did his part, but Gannon, go on to somewhere else. But that situation points out the fact that African American coaches, this guy can have a bad Super Bowl and lose a game, and then he gets a job. Basically, Raheem Morris of the Rams shuts down the Cincinnati Bengals in the second half. They can't spell a job for him. He doesn't get any office.
Denise and I were talking about Eric Bieniemy earlier today.
Yeah.
How has he not gotten a position somewhere?
Well, because he has a slightly darker tan. Yeah. All these guys, they're black coaches. I mean, remember, this is the first Super Bowl where you had two black quarterbacks. Look how long it took for the NFL to recognize that black quarterbacks can play. It's a mentality. It's like these owners are not comfortable with African American men. They just aren't. And someone needs to say that.
Doug Williams was the first African American quarterback, and that was only 30 years ago. To play in a Super Bowl. I mean, it's outrageous.
It is.
But regardless of that, it was an exciting game until the end.
Yeah.
What about next year?
Well, the Eagles are going to lose some people. They got to get a new offensive coordinator. Some people are speculating that Brian Johnson, the Eagles quarterback coach, who is African American, is going to step into that role. They got to find a better defensive coordinator than what they have, and it was just like Jonathan Gannon, good riddance. And we know who you are, but the thing is, they're going to lose some people along the line. Probably Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox, a lot. Jason Kelsey is speculating about retirement, so that's where we are with that.
All right. Well, Chris, thank you so much. We have to go now.
Yes,
Omar
thank you.
Sabir will be on the program next week, and we'll see you on Hall Monitor.
Okay, thank you guys. Thanks for having me here. Y'all have a great show.